What's going on, guys? Scott from phasingplayer.com here to record a video about a game that has blown my head off. I love Magic Realm. You looked at the name of the video, you looked at the thumbnail, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to bury the lead. I adore this game. For those that don't know, Magic Realm is a fantasy adventure game from the late 1970s. It's designed by Richard Hamblin, and it is one of the original games of this style. You travel around, beating monsters, getting treasure, learning spells, collecting gold, ultimately trying to get the most victory points to be the winner. Magic Realm is a game that I've known about for a long time. I'm well aware of its infamy about how complicated and dense and difficult this game is. And honestly, it scared me away for quite a while. I always thought, oh, maybe this is too much. Maybe Magic Realm is going to be the game that I just struggle with, that I just can't really break into. It's something I've done often with board games, with video games, with movies, is I get something in my head, holding this like a little pizza right now, it's something in my head that is like insurmountable or something that is notoriously difficult to understand or get into. With board games, I think one of the first really difficult games that I was made aware of, one of the first like milestone games, was Agricola. I heard Agricola was a really hard game to play well. Misery Farm, everyone called it. And so I'm like, oh, okay, I know this game is going to be something. To do well in this game, to not let it just break you down is going to be hard. And I played Agricola, I learned it, I did decently and well in it when the multiple times I've played. And I learned that I like the game a lot. Agricola is really good. And then I'd play more games and realize, okay, Agricola wasn't really a big deal. And I think the next game that I hit was like Twilight Imperium. I picked up a copy of Twilight Imperium 3rd edition, and I learned it. We actually played like, I think in the span of like 2 weeks, we played like maybe 3 times. We had a 6-person group, and we all attached to the game. It was all our first time playing it. We attached to it, and we were like, this game is awesome. And that was like a good milestone for me. And so then I'd start looking at like, what's next? What is the next game that's like, this is a beast. This one's super complicated. And I think the next one for me was probably High Frontier. I was curious. I was scared by the complexity, the theoretical complexity of something like High Frontier. And I played it, I learned it. It was a hard game to learn, a hard game to play well, still is, at least for me. But I liked it a whole lot. And so High Frontier that was sort of the, check that box. And for a while, the game that was always in my head to eventually climb the mountain of was Magic Realm. And I was always, to be honest, scared of it. I was worried I wouldn't be able to understand the game. I wouldn't be able to break through like I have before. And I spent a lot of time ignoring Magic Realm. The commonly used 3rd edition of the game has a rulebook that is the regular version is like 120 pages. The deluxe version that's easier to read is like 240 pages. The learn to play guide is like a 300-page guide. It was blowing my mind that this game could even be something a human could understand and play. So I spent a lot of time ignoring Magic Realm intentionally because I didn't think I could get it. It was a mountain to climb later, but right now was not the time. Well, earlier this year, about 6 months ago, at the time of this recording, I managed to find a copy of this that was easily attainable. It's pretty much always available on Board Game Geek or on eBay or something, but it's an expensive game. Like $100 to $200 copy is what you can expect for most cases, and it's almost always in rough shape. But I ended up getting it in kind of a bulk trade with some other stuff, and I got the game, and I'll tell you, this was a bear to learn. Easily the hardest game I've ever had to learn. Harder than something like Fields of Fire to go into the war game realm. The notoriously hard to learn solo game Fields of Fire. I feel like I learned that one quicker than I picked up on Magic Realm. And part of that is because Magic Realm is from the wargaming kind of section of the hobby in some way. It's an Avalon Hill game. It is something that sort of feels like miniature wargaming in some capacity. And it uses a ton of proprietary terms and words and styles that you don't find anywhere else. And it's just a hard game to learn. It's a really hard game to learn. In fact, pull this out here. Magic Realm. This is, I think, the first time, and here's the printed copy of the 3rd edition rules, which you know, a lot of pages, 122 pages, I think, 100 something. It is the first time, as you might be able to see, that I put little tabs on the front, on the side and top of the rulebook, so I can easily find sections that I need to. Additionally, I used yellow highlighter to highlight a bunch of passages all over the book. I've got yellow highlighter all over the place, just so there are little things I can, you know, remind myself of. And it's all really all over. It's like you're not going to go 2 or 3 pages in this book without running into some amount of highlighter that I've put in here. And it's been really helpful. It's been super helpful for while I was learning the game to be able to go in and okay, that's right. I can only do this thing in this instance. I can only take horses, you know, around here. And I've never done that with a rulebook before. I sat down with this rulebook probably a dozen times or more, just reading parts of it while I have the game set up and I'm playing, and I'm just like, okay, I got to remember this thing. I got to note this. Okay, let me put a tab over here so I can easily find the weapons and monsters tables. It was a whole thing. Learning this game is crazy. The book of learning that fans made is a tremendous help, but it's also a multi-100-page tome to crack into. So my point is, Magic Realm's difficulty in learning is no joke. However, in my opinion, and I take this opinion from the probably 9 or 10 people that I've done this with at this point, Magic Realm is not that hard to teach. If you know the game, you can communicate the ideas in much easier English than what the rulebook puts forth. Magic Realm is a game of exceptions and very specific scenarios that you need to deal with. And the rulebook attempts to cover all of these exceptions and all of these fringe cases. You can teach the game ignoring a lot of that stuff and just mention them as they come up. You don't need to talk about how horses work before people have a chance to get horses. You don't really need to talk about how magic can necessarily interact with everything if someone doesn't have the opportunity to use it at that time. You don't need to go over all these things until they come up. And so if you're teaching the game to someone, you can just teach some of the basic ideas and they can get playing quickly. And the other thing with Magic Realm is it's actually kind of easy to play. Magic Realm is not, in play, a terribly difficult game. In most cases, turns resolve really quick. And that's actually another misconception I had about Magic Realm. I was under the impression this was like an all-day game. This is another Twilight Imperium, you know, that you're going to spend 8 hours playing. Dude, solo games of this, when I play on my own, I can knock out in under an hour, often like 30 minutes. And with 2 or 3 players, it's even like a sub 2-hour game if the people mostly know how to play. And that's something that really has led me to loving Magic Realm. I'm going to talk a little bit here about the things I really like about Magic Realm and why I think people that are maybe afraid of it or even unaware of it should be giving it a shot, because I'll say it again, I said it at the jump. This is one of my favorite games of all time, I'm happy to say. Yes, I only started playing it 6 months ago. I've played this game almost 20 times in those 6 months. I am playing single player, by myself I play with 2 players, 3 players, I've played up to 5 players in a couple of games. Multiple times I've done this. And it's tremendous. Honestly, like every player count I've tried. This game supports up to 16 players, which would be insanity. I think you'd need 2 copies of the game just to expand the map more. But I'm over the moon when it comes to Magic Realm. I am loving it so much. And I'm hoping that I can help convince some other people to give it a shot, because you might love it just as much as I do. So some great things about Magic Realm. First of all, it is a fantasy game from the 1970s that sort of came up at the same time as Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, first edition. Which means, unlike basically every fantasy game post AD&D, it is not taking inspiration from this. It's taking inspiration from the stuff that D&D also took inspiration from. So it has a lot of stuff that is sort of atypical for what we would look at in 2022 as fantasy tropes or things in the fantasy genre. Goblins in this game are not wusses that you can just beat up and run off taking their stuff. Goblins will mess you up in Magic Realm, okay? You'll have a mob of goblins that will just dominate you. Conversely, dragons are not quite as fearsome. They can be, certainly they can be. But sometimes the scariest thing in Magic Realm are giant bats, okay? Just kind of regular sort of animals. Because Magic Realm doesn't want you to come in with this modern 2022 knowledge of what fantasy is. You need to approach it as its own thing. Maybe if you were a big fan of like pulp novels or fantasy novels from the 60s and 70s, that would make a lot more sense. That's sort of where Magic Realm takes some of its inspiration. Again, sort of like Dungeons and Dragons. But coming at it from a modern lens, it is honestly super refreshing to me. It's not an epic fantasy game. It's not something where you're going to become this demigod and you're going to level up a bunch. There's not even leveling up by default in Magic Realm. You don't level up. You don't get new skills. You don't gain experience. None of that's in Magic Realm. There are optional rules for it, which Magic Realm is full of optional rules, but I'll get to that in a bit. But by default, there is no leveling. It's got this adventure game sort of feel, this RPG fantasy feel, but without a lot of those tropes. So that's one reason that I really like Magic Realm. It has a very unique feel to it. It feels like Magic Realm, but is also a fantasy game. It's got wizards, it's got an elf, it's got goblins, it's got dragons and trolls and giants, but they don't always function like you'd expect coming at it from 2022. Magic Realm is its own thing. It's got this really emotive world for you to invest yourself in. It feels alive in a way a lot of games don't. And part of it is because Magic Realm is really dangerous. It doesn't hold your hand. It doesn't tell you, hold on, you might not want to go do this. It lets you figure these things out. You're not the hero of the land or some demigod that gets thrown into this magical world. You're just sort of a dude that's there. And you have to learn about the things around you and figure out what's dangerous and what's not. And that exploration, that discovery period, which I'll say again, like 20 games in, still am discovering new stuff about this game. It's incredible. It's really immersive. It's something that pulled me in very strongly, and as well, some of the people I've taught the game and have played with also feel that way. They feel like this game really helps tell emergent stories incredibly well. It puts you into this world that is incredibly foreign feeling that you really want to go learn about and discover. You meet different factions and different organizations. You meet a ton of different enemies. You can hire people to join you and help you on your cause. You go find these great treasures and these mundane treasures. You go complete quests. You go do all this stuff. And it does it all with basically no flavor text, no prompt. It just puts you in this world, and the way the game's been put together just comes alive. It comes alive like so few games that I've played. And this is a game that is pushing 50 years old at the time of this recording. And there's just not a lot like it. There's not a lot that I can say does it as well as Magic Realm does it. The second thing that I really like about Magic Realm is the gameplay is structured sort of like a series of puzzles. You have 16 characters to play as, and on the surface, a lot of them can seem very similar. The wizard and the sorcerer can seem like kind of the same character if you just look at them on the surface and even in name. But when you're playing the game, you see little nuances that have been thrown in to these characters that actually dramatically change how they're played. Oh, look at this. This fella is friendly with the rogues, whereas this other one, who is otherwise very similar stat-wise, is only neutral with the rogues. How does that change? How does that change how they play the game? It can actually change it quite dramatically, because relationships with these neutral factions doesn't seem like super cool and sexy on the surface, but when you're playing the game, you actually can realize that relationships with these neutral factions can change a lot. It can dictate a lot about how you want to play these characters and be successful with them. Additionally, the way you attain victory in this game is with victory points, except you dictate what is important to you at the start of the game. It's broken up into 5 sections of great treasures, spells, gold, notoriety, and fame. And you will set a certain number of points in each of those that you're choosing. And then you need to attain points within all of the goals, but ideally the ones you picked, to ultimately give you a score at the end of the game. If it's above 0, you've done really good. And because of that, sort of customizing your victory conditions, you need to know what the character you're playing is good at and what the other people in the game are going to be trying to do. Magic Realm can be cooperative and competitive at the same time. Sometimes you want to work with some characters while combating others. And maybe by the time the game gets to its conclusion, you've recognized, hey, your ally, who you thought was your ally, is actually doing way better than you. So maybe you want to go fight them. Because there's PvP in this game too. You can fight any of the player characters. So looking at from a kind of a top-down view of what you want to accomplish in the game, with each character is going to be different and how they accomplish it is going to be different. And figuring out this like puzzle of, okay, how do I do well with the Witch King? Or how do I succeed as the swordsman when the wizard is also in the game? Trying to figure out what you want to do with each character and doing repeat plays and trying to maximize efficiency is actually tremendously fun and challenging. And the fact that there are 16 different characters to do this with means there's a ton of replay value. And not only that, but how long a game lasts is also customizable. The game is built on a system of months. So a standard game is 1 month of play. It's 4 weeks, 4 7-day weeks, so 28 turns. But you can play 2 months or 3 months or 6 months or 12 months or 28 months. You can play whatever you want. At the start of the game, you set what you're going to do. Changes how many victory points you're going to need in different categories. You can play with weather and seasons that will affect the game as well. And it can honestly, you can play big, long games that can feel, to some degree, almost like almost World of Warcraft, like MMORPG sort of system, where the world is alive and changing, and you are going around and doing things and completing long-term goals and short-term goals. And that's actually something that also changes your sort of puzzly nature. How do you do well with a wizard over a 1-month game versus how do you do well with that same wizard over a 3-month game? Different styles, different strategies you need to incorporate. Because you have more time to do things, you can set larger goals or more ambitious goals. And that's something I've really taken to in Magic Realm. I talk with a buddy of mine somewhat frequently about, hey, we tried this 2-month strategy on the swordsman, and it worked okay, but I think maybe you want to do these things in this order instead. And then you go try it. Or you say, I think the swordsman would work really well with the pilgrim, so why don't we team up here and go do stuff together and maximize points. You can build these alliances into your strategies. You could even play solitaire games where you control multiple characters. And again, these are new puzzles to explore, new puzzles to figure out. It's really interesting. It's really fascinating and engaging as well. Not only is the setting engaging, but that sort of gameplay style is also super engaging. So a third thing that I like about Magic Realm that I sort of alluded to a little bit ago, it's very customizable for how you want to play. There are official, optional rules included in the rulebook, changes how combat works. I've mentioned weather and seasons before, those are optional. Playing multiple months is optional. All sorts of rules tweaks that are official from the designer at the time the game came out or shortly after. Additionally, because this game is almost 50 years old and is really good, it's developed a really passionate niche community that has developed a ton of variants and optional rules for people to jump into, some of which are sort of canonized as like kind of the main way to play the game. You want to use these things if you're going to play the game. And it really interestingly blurs the line between what is an official like part of the game and what is an unofficial house rule. Is something a house rule if it's been being used by a lot of people for 30 years? Or is that just the game at this point? You know, it's not like some random house rule a guy came up with a year ago. It's some house rule that got put in decades ago that people use. It's essentially canonizing some of these house rules, as far as the community goes anyway. But you don't have to use all those. I mean, I've talked to plenty of people that are like, I like rules A, B, C, and L, and other people that say, no, rule B sucks. You don't want to use B, but you do want to use E and H in addition to A, C, and L. There's so many ways to play the game. The community, in my experience, is very friendly, very forthcoming, and willing to talk about the pros and cons of all sorts of things. You can play the game a number of ways. It's really ripe for house rules. And I think that people that enjoy kind of building out their own sort of world would really like the sort of options available in Magic Realm. and the ability to customize it to your own liking. You create sort of the game that you want out of the skeleton that Magic Realm provides. Okay, so some things that you might not really like about Magic Realm. Some things that I don't like about Magic Realm. First of all, it is a fiddly mess. It is a mess to play. I love old games. If you follow this channel for any appreciable amount of time, you probably understand that I like weird indie games and I also like old games. I will champion old games all day long. But there are some modern game design ideas that I think really surpass a lot of what old stuff does. One of them in Magic Realm that is a huge nightmare is this. What is this called? This is the treasure setup card or appearance chart. Every game at setup, you have to load this up with little cards and monster tokens. They go in the same spot every time. A couple spots get randomized a little, but you have to set this up, and then at the start of every day, you roll a die to see which monsters are sort of awake and prowling and which ones are dormant. And if they show up on the map, you take them off of here and you put them onto the map. But this is a nightmare to use because it's so tight with chits and cards and all these things. You try to pick one thing up and you shuffle everything else around a little bit. So this just becomes such a mess. There are people that have developed ways to get around using this, but it's still a process that you have to handle. And by default, you'll use this and hate it. Honestly, it makes setup such a nightmare. And setup on its own in Magic Realm is kind of a nightmare. The rulebook says players that know how to play will still take almost an hour to set up the game. And in my experience, that's about right. It's like a 30 to 60 minute setup. It's just a pain. It's a pain in the butt. The game honestly works best digitally. There's a lovely Java app that people have made that's been also around for decades, I think, called Realm Speak. Now, if you Google Realm Speak, it'll take you to a website that hasn't been updated in 8 or 10 years. There are newer versions. Someone maintains it and updates it and bug fixes and adds new features. They're on Board Game Geek. There's, in fact, a sub-forum on the Magic Realm page for Realm Speak. And new versions get posted when they get updated. And they're updated somewhat often. So if you're going to check out Realm Speak, which I highly recommend, you should check on the Board Game Geek forum for the latest version. Realm Speak automates a ton of stuff. The interface is a little clunky. It's not a good way to learn the game. You need to have a base understanding of Magic Realm, and then you can jump into Realm Speak, and it actually can help sort of solidify some ideas in your head, but you need those ideas there first. You need the seeds of Magic Realm planted before you can jump into Realm Speak and really understand it. So Magic Realm is super fiddly in the physical game. The chits as well don't have as much information as they could. There are options in Realm Speak to add more information, but the real official physical chits do not have good info on them. You will be referencing rulebooks all the time. Additionally, the rulebook will need to be referenced often when you're playing Magic Realm, even if you know how to play. That's why I have my book full of highlighter, full of tabs. It's because I reference it 100 times a game, okay? Unfortunately, the Magic Realm rules are weird and dense and not always intuitive. So you have to be hugging that rule book the whole game, even if you know how to play. Another thing you might not like about Magic Realm, depending on your tastes, it is really brutal. Until you know what your character is good at, you are going to die. And you're going to die frequently because there are tons of dice rolls in this game and they often won't go your way. Unless you kind of know what to expect. Magic Realm at its core is probably a game about risk assessment and management. You need to know, is this a fight that I can take? Is this a thing I can do? How hard is it going to be? And how much time should I be investing into this? Or is it insurmountable and I should be focusing on something easier? Until you know what that is, because it's different for every character. I mentioned dragons versus bats before. Some characters will slay dragons no issue and will get mobbed by wolves or goblins and will not stand a chance. You're a big knight in armor and you can decapitate dragons and slay ogres, no issue. But you get swarmed by 2 bats or a bunch of goblins with spears, you're done. Not only will they kill you, you probably can't even escape. Once you're in that fight, you're just waiting for death. Other characters are the opposite. You might have a spellcaster that can blast all those goblins in one fiery blast, but if they go up against a dragon, that dragon's going to mess them up, without question. which is actually where some teaming up can come in. You can be nice to travel in pairs where one person can handle one type of creature and the other can handle another type of creature. But you might not like that discovery process because it'll result in you dying a lot. And it can feel like nonsense sometimes. You can walk into an area and suddenly a bunch of monsters show up that you either didn't expect or were hoping that they wouldn't because the odds are low. And they do, and they kill you, and that's it. Sorry. Magic Realm does not hold your hand. It will let you die all the time. You just have to be okay with it. You have to be okay with it, and you have to be able to learn from it. There's very little in Magic Realm where you can say, yeah, I couldn't have done anything, I was screwed. Maybe in that instance, that exact time you couldn't have done anything, but maybe 2 turns ago, 3 turns ago, 10 turns ago, you could have plotted a route a little differently to hopefully succeed. Again, it's a puzzle. It's a puzzle where you're piecing these things together over 28 or more turns. Sometimes you need to think ahead 10 or 12 or 15 turns, and you need to get that puzzle put together properly. But if you don't like that, if you don't like trial and error and resetting frequently and rolling a lot of dice, you might not like Magic Realm. It might feel too harsh. It might feel too unfair at times. You need to weather storms in Magic Realm. And you're really vulnerable. Again, you are not the hero of the land. You might get bit by a wolf and you just die, and that's it, the end. And I can understand why that wouldn't be fun for people. So understand that Magic Realm is mean and it hates you and is really harsh. And you just have to accept it. Another thing people may not like about Magic Realm is it is kind of random in a lot of cases. You roll on a billion tables in this game. Essentially everything in this game is resolved by rolling 2 6-sided dice, taking the higher result, and referencing a table for what you're trying to do. You're trying to find secret passages. You got to reference a searching table. Are you trying to buy something from these merchants? You got to roll on a commerce table or a meeting table to see how well they treat you. Are you trying to cast a wish spell? Roll on the wish table. Are you trying to stab someone with a sword? Roll on the stabbing with a sword table. Are you trying to run away? Roll on the running table. Are you trying to hide, which you'll do a lot in Magic Realm? Roll on the hide table. Are you trying to open up a pit of darkness, of flame and evil and death? Roll on the pit table. This game has a number of tables like I have not seen in another game. There are sections of this rulebook that are just tables upon tables upon tables. Do you want to learn a spell from a spell book? Roll on the roll on a spell learning table. Do you want to transform into something else? Roll on the transform table. Do you have a curse? Roll on the curse table. Are you moving enemies around? Roll on the repositioned denizens table. It is almost comedic how many tables are in this game, and you roll on them for everything. And because of that, there's a random chance for a lot of these things. And again, it's, like I said before, it's risk management, it's risk assessment. It is figuring out, is this worth the difficulty of doing? Do I want to try to learn this spell at this altar 8 times in a row in hopes that I will learn this thing? Is it worth spending a quarter of this game doing that? Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes it is. If it's really important that you get this, yeah, you're going to have to spend every turn. I'm going to search 4 times. I failed every one. Next turn, I'm going to search 4 more times. Failed it. Next turn, I'm going to search 4 more times. That's just the way Magic Realm goes, and you got to be ready for that. You got to be ready for a lot of failure and a lot of repetition. So those are some things that I like and don't like about Magic Realm. Obviously, as I said at the start, I love Magic Realm. It has become a total favorite of mine. It's incredible. I think more people should try it out, and I think there's probably a lot to learn from a game of Magic Realm in terms of designing games. I haven't played anything else like it exactly, but I can see its DNA in essentially every adventure game that I've played. Magic Realm, I think, was really influential to people that played it, and it probably spawned a lot of ideas. It gets called the first sandbox game, the first game where you're just thrown into a space and allowed to explore and do things in it. How many sandbox games exist now? There are tons of fantasy, especially fantasy sandbox games, where you can just go to different places and do different things at your own whim. Magic Realm, that's Magic Realm. Magic Realm built that idea in board games. Magic Realm is also possibly the first game to use a hex map that you build out at the start of the game. The map's going to be different every time. Games where you build a map at the start, there's a random map generated at the start. That might be a Magic Realm innovation too. Magic Realm has done a ton for laying the groundwork. It's from the 1970s. Again, this came up with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It did not stem out of it. It is an incredibly innovative, incredibly original game from the time. And for my money, I haven't played anything else like it that hits the same notes, that does the same sorts of things, that captures an imagination the way it does, the really interesting gameplay systems it presents, the difficult, engaging puzzles every character creates. All 16 characters play very differently. You might look at 2 that look similar, and then you actually try to do well with them, and you realize you got to do different things. The cooperative nature and the competitive nature, the distrust it can sow in the people playing it amongst each other, and the companionship that can be required to do well when people work together and the map is built out in the right way and the monsters come out at the right time or the wrong time and you need to work together, or you see someone doing well and you have to stomp on them. Magic Realm is a game of so many options and so much variety. I've had the game in my possession now for, like I said, about 6 months. I've played it about 20 times. There are some evenings where I'd play 4 games of Magic Realm in one sitting. There was a time, at this point I'm still playing it almost once a week. Sometimes I will play 3 times a week. Experiment with different rules. Experiment with different characters. Try out combos of characters. Really just engage in this world that is also still being expanded by fans. There are giant expansions people are making. I didn't know when I first learned about Magic Realm that I would love it as much as I do. But I can say, again, without reservation, Magic Realm is one of the greatest games ever made. It is one of my favorite games that I've ever played. And I think that more people should give it a shot. Either make the effort to learn it yourself, find someone to teach you. There are people on Board Game Geek that do teaches of the game. I might even make a video myself of a kind of a quick rundown of how you yourself can get into Magic Realm and understand it and break into this rulebook. It is a very dense rulebook, but boy howdy is this game worth the effort. That's it. That's my video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And I'm honestly, now that I've talked about this for so long, I think I might sit down here at 1 a.m. and play a game of Magic Realm before I go to bed. So good night and take care.